Hello, I'm Natalie Graham and this is the Sunday Politics in the South East. Coming up later is a curry crisis cooking up in the South East. Restaurant owners are struggling to recruit chefs. We're going to hear about the campaign launched by two Conservative MPs to plug the gap. One of which is Hugh Merriman, the Conservative MP for Bexhill and Battle, who joins us in the studio this week, as does Chris Wells, who's the leader of the UKIP Council at Thanet District. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. Now, I'm going to talk to you first, Hugh, about Europe, because you're one of the MPs who hasn't yet declared which way you're going to vote in the referendum. Are you still deciding, or do you know really what you're going to do?
I think I know, but the reason why I'm not publicly telling everybody how I'm going to vote is because I don't believe I should be telling people how they should vote. I think it's important to try and give people information, promote debate, try and give them as much of evidence as I can in order for them to make their own minds up. So I'm chairing 8 debates across the constituency. And the reality is if I tell people which way I'm voting, then I won't be able to chair it with neutrality and balance, which I think is really important.
Other Conservative MPs are doing a similar thing and are still managing to achieve that. And at the end of the day, your vote's as important as everyone else's. Does it really matter? Are people really going to be influenced that much by what you say you're going to do?
Well, I think when I've spoken to constituents, they've said to me that the biggest challenge they have is trying to decipher through the wall of noise they have at the moment. And I really do think, and maybe it's old-fashioned, that in a referendum, it doesn't really matter what I believe in. This isn't a debate that I should be telling people what they should be doing. It should be a debate where I should be helping people, informing people so that they can actually get to the best outcome. And I really don't believe that if people know which way I'm going to vote, that they would trust me when it comes to chairing with neutrality. So that's the way I've decided I'm going to do it, and that's the way I'll stay.
Other MPs have spoken about the pressures they're coming under, particularly from their constituency associations. Is that something you've found, pressure to go one way or the other?
No, not at all, because I I set my stall out day one that I would do this, and actually I think people have found it quite refreshing. I've had more inquiries from the media asking which I'm going to vote than I have from constituents. And when I've explained to constituents that my #1 priority is to try and give them the information to help them make up their mind up, they know how important this is. They think it's the most important decision they'll make for a generation in terms of voting. So, as I say, I know it's normally the case politicians tell people how they should vote, but this time I'm actually going to leave it to people to decide, and I'm going to try my best to inform them and give them all the tools they can to make their own decision.
Thank you. And I know, Chris, you'd probably love to have a discussion about Europe as a UKIP council leader, but let's talk about Thanet. It's nearly a year since you took control, albeit for 5 months, I think, before you lost control of the council politically. You said at the time when we spoke a year ago you wanted it to be the most boring council in the country after a very troubled time. It hasn't been that boring, though, has it, over the last 12 months?
I hope it's been a bit more boring than it was before. I mean, we had the 2014 peer review, which described the council membership, certainly then, as being toxic and dysfunctional. And I hope we've been a little more boring than that. We've actually had that peer review team back, and we've seen the initial touch of their report, and that will be made public, I think, probably in the next couple of weeks. And I think you'll find that they will have marked a really good change in the way it operates.
It's been a difficult time. I know Manston's been the big problem that's caused a lot of fighting within your party about the right way to approach it and the right way in which you have been approaching it. We've got local elections coming up. I know not in Thanet, but one academic, Matthew Goodwin, who's studied your party extensively, in his opinion, your party really does need to take local elections more seriously, train up candidates, maybe take a leaf out of the Liberal Democrats' book so that you can have a strong local base to then grow the party from nationally. Based on your experiences in power in Thanet, do you think that's really achievable for UKIP?
I think it has to be achievable for UKIP if UKIP is going to be a serious player across the country. Because actually, if you think about it, that's the way most of the established political parties actually came to having prominence nationally. They built up good, solid local bases. The Liberal Democrats did over a number of years.
You seem to have a particular problem with infighting at a local level, and that's not going to help that cause, is it?
No, it's not. And you know, let's be quite honest. We came in with 33 council members, of which 31 had never done anything like this before in their lives. And sort of 2 weeks in, they wondered why we hadn't changed the world, and they didn't understand the procedures and whatever. A lot of it actually sits around that, and you have to have had the opportunity to have been in power or been in local politics a little while to understand how it works and how to get the best out of it, and that's some of those frustrations what we were fighting. Once we actually found that the people who were being most difficult went off and formed their own group, it settled down, the team became much more unified, and I think you'll find that things have been much smoother since.
And very boring.
Well, I hope so.
Thanks very much. Now, it's 5 years since the Turner Contemporary Art Gallery opened in Margate. The gallery, named after the famous painter, appears to be injecting new life into one of the country's most deprived towns. The rich and famous have flocked to Margate since it opened, among them Stephen Fry, local girl Tracy Emin, and even Her Majesty the Queen. But is everyone locally feeling the benefit of this cultural regeneration? Sarah Neville's been to find out.
The skies over Thanet are the loveliest in all Europe.
Margate, the light and landscape that inspired Britain's foremost landscape painter, J.M.W. Turner. It's 5 years since the £17.5 million gallery, built in his name, opened with much aplomb on the site of his mistress's guest house. But what has modern art done for Margate?
This gallery shows that art makes a difference to everyone and to society. It's transformed Margate, it's given the town a new identity, and people around the world are interested in us.
In its heyday, Margate was one of Britain's favourite holiday destinations. But with the popularity of package trips abroad, the town died, and by the 1980s was on its knees. The arrival of the Turner Contemporary in 2011 was the catalyst for a significant regeneration programme based on sustainable tourism, and millions has been spent on job creation, better housing, the renovation of Dreamland, and express rail links with London to bring back the punters. The former leader of Thanet Council, Iris Johnston, was involved in the Turner project from its inception.
There were times when we were told it'll never happen in Margate, this has to be Canterbury, this has to be somewhere else. And we stuck to our guns and said it's got to be here. Turner would want it to be here. The whole thing has been slowly built up, and I think that everybody will aspire to something better if they see that it's succeeding, and it is succeeding. Just needs all of us to support, and the fact that it's free for the people of this town means a lot.
Gone are the kiss-me-quick hats and donkey rides, replaced by a creative quarter, peppered with retro shops, chic cafes and even a boutique hotel. Some call it Shoreditch-on-Sea. Despite that, Margate is still one of the most deprived towns in the country.
There's no doubt that the Turners putting Margate back on the map. People are talking about it, they're writing about it, and they're visiting it. Almost 2 million people have been since it opened. That helped to generate over £50 million for the local economy and pushed up house prices by almost 30%. But is everyone feeling touched by the so-called Turner effect?
With problems like homelessness and high youth unemployment, some academics question the benefit the gallery has brought to local people. Is it a matter of gentrification rather than regeneration?
Well, the Turner Contemporary has had a really astonishing effect on Margate in some respects. Over the course of my research, Margate has been featured in the New York Times, it's been featured as one of the must-visit destinations for the Rough Guide. And that's kind of would have been unthinkable, you know, only 10 years ago, perhaps even more recently than that. But of course, that's only telling part of the story, and the regeneration of Margate requires much more than press interest. We need to think about the very serious social, economic problems that Margate faces, and which Margate still faces. And I'm not sure the Turner Contemporary has really had any substantive effect on this very, very deprived part of England.
There's clearly more to do to complete the transformation of this seaside town, but the future looks brighter, and locals hope there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Sarah Neville reporting. Well, joining us now from Margate is Victoria Pomeroy, the director of the Turner Contemporary. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, back in 2009, before you opened, one national newspaper critic said, if Margate were a blind date, you'd turn on your heels and run. Do you think the same critic would write the same thing about Margate today?
Well, hopefully not. I think Margate has been transformed by the arrival of Turner Contemporary and Dreamland. Margate is a fantastic place, and I think what we have to do is get more people to come and experience Margate. You're seeing it on a wonderful sunny day. This is how it is often, but I think Turner Contemporary has achieved a huge amount. There's still quite a lot to be done in Margate, but working together we can deliver more.
Now, you've clearly worked hard to try and avoid being accused of being elitist, and your outreach programme, I know, has reached around 100,000 people. But one critic, Dr. Jonathan Ward, says that actually the divisions have deepened in Margate since Turner Contemporary opened. He puts it between the creative population and the uncreative population. Do you think he has a point?
Well, I think we've seen a lot of divisions in society over the last few years. Perhaps they're more polarised than they were before. I think in Margate, though, we have seen a transformation and change. And so, I mean, I don't know what evidence he brings to that, but I think what we are seeing is that people who've never visited an art gallery or museum in their lives are coming to Turner Contemporary and are engaging with what we do. We are working with some primary schools, 4 primary schools in Margate. They are also experiencing real change and transformation amongst those young people. So I think I'd like to see the evidence, but I think society at large is possibly more polarised than it was a few years ago.
Well, I think the evidence are things like poor public health and still being one of the most deprived parts of the country, alongside rising house prices and rising employment. So it's that mixture of benefits. But if we could move on to public spending, because it's becoming a lot harder now to justify the amount of money given to the arts when the government's reining in what it gives. Some have argued you should charge an entrance fee. Do you think you will end up doing that at some point in the future?
Well, we've been very grateful for public investment, and the public investment has leveraged in other investments. We are a charity and we work with trusts and foundations, individuals, and we generate a lot of our own income through our activities. We have various different activities, from catering, which you can see behind me. So I think we are very conscious of the reductions in public investment and the need to grow our activities and portfolio to continue to support what we do. And as Iris said earlier, it's really important that we have free admission.
OK, Victoria Pomeroy, thank you very much for joining us. Chris Wells, leader of Thanet District Council, how deep do you think the benefits that the Turner Contemporary have brought, which undoubtedly it has, how deep do they go in Thanet, would you say?
A lot deeper than your critique, Dr. Jonathan Ward, I think, realises or suspects. If you look at some of the things that have been done over the last 5 years, and some of the very simple things that have been done, one of the most important training courses that the Turner Contemporary undertook in its early couple of years was actually, it managed to persuade lots of hairdressers and lots of taxi drivers to come in and learn about modern art, so they could talk to the people who came into their shops and travelled their taxis about it. In the same way, some of the cafe owners who sit around very close to the Turner Contemporary where it is, one or two of them have become inspired in the same way, and they will actually give their staff paid time, their waitresses and waiters paid time to go and see the new exhibitions when they come in, so that they can actually talk of their own perspective on what they've seen or whatever. And by spreading it in that way, you're actually getting a whole range of different people looking at modern art in a way that they probably never considered they would do before and never considered would be part of their lives.
What about the funding issue? Because actually it's the UKIP leader on Kent County Council, Col Latchford, who's argued, I think, that the Turner Contemporary should charge an entrance fee and that Kent County Council should reduce the amount it gives. What's your position on that?
I had a quiet word with him afterwards, and I don't think we'll hear that again.
OK, so you're strongly in favour of government funding?
Absolutely so, because I think, to actually make... I knew that the Turner Contemporary was going to be successful one day, sat in that cafe behind Victoria you just saw, waiting to see somebody there. And there was a couple of people next to me who were turned out to be students from Leeds Metropolitan School of Art. And I asked them, what they were doing down here, and their answer to me was very straightforward. We've come to do the contemporary art scene down south. And I said, what does that mean? And they said, a day at the Tate Modern and a day down here. That'll do me.
They might want to go along the coast a little bit, to Hastings, to Bexhill, to Eastbourne, where there are also new invested art galleries. But in Bexhill still, there's a higher unemployment than when the Delaware relaunched 10 years ago, Hugh. I mean, it's a difficult tool with which to use against the regeneration backdrop, isn't it?
Well, I'd really applaud our district council, Rother District Council, because they've protected the funding for the Delaware. And so they've put a 9-year programme in and £500,000 a year, and that's ring-fenced. Because they recognise how important it is, not just for bringing almost 500,000 visitors down to Bexhill and showcasing what we have, but also it employs about 100 people, and more importantly than that, it doesn't just rest on its laurels. The director, Stuart Drew, is a real pioneering man, and he will involve himself in regeneration in the town. So I sit with him trying to get a hotel group to come into Bexhill. I sit with him in terms of putting on a jobs and apprenticeship fair, which we're putting on together at the end of April in the Delaware, which is, you know, just incredible to see a space like that
Hastings
used.
round the corner, perhaps more comparable with Margate in terms of its history and in terms of the deprivation. They're both among the two most in the top 10 of deprived coastal towns in the country. It's not enough, is it, just to open an art gallery? You need to do more. Doesn't there need to be a more concerted effort to regenerate areas like that?
Well, it is, but I think we also have to use what's best in our coastal towns. And unlike in inshore towns, we don't have the same business that's set up there. So we need to attract business to come down. I think these icons do that. It's even more important now than it ever has been, because we, as communities, are going to have to rely on our business rates in terms of what we spend. And we have an ageing population in our coastal towns, so we need even more money in. And we're only going to get that if we can attract business. How do we attract business? By showing that we're an artistic and a cultural centre for people to live and enjoy.
And Chris, well, just to end that point that I made to Victoria Pomeroy, that you might get rising house prices, lower unemployment, but when some pockets have serious economic and social problems, this isn't necessarily the answer to those, is it?
It isn't necessarily the answer, but the rising tide of business and the general sum of economic growth that comes about because of that, when visitors come down, and you need hotels and you need restaurants and you need places for them to go in the evening on top of the visitors.
And is that a longer game in 5 years?
And it is a longer game. I remember very, very well during the progress of the Turner Contemporary, many people arguing what they really needed was a car park nearby. And again and again and again, I said, no, let them park in the town, let them walk through the town and give the traders a chance to fleece them en route. And that's working.
Lovely. And throughout the day on Friday, on the 5th anniversary of its opening, there'll be more about the impact of the Turner Contemporary on BBC Radio Kent, including Dominic King's Drive Time show, which will be live in Margate. Now, from one cultural institution to another, curry. Chicken tikka may be the nation's favourite dish, but could our curry houses be under threat? Restaurateurs here say they're struggling to recruit enough specialist chefs because of new limits on immigration from outside the EU. And now MPs are campaigning too, including my guest Hugh Merriman. First, let's hear the views of two restaurant owners in Sussex.
If you go back to 1970, there was a restaurant owner and chef. They established a business in this country, and children wants to be more educated. They want to go for the different trade, and they want to go like a solicitor, barrister, an accountant. This is the big gap.
We've really flown the flag for the apprenticeship scheme, and we've had a lot of apprentices through our door. And unfortunately, you know, some of them stayed, you know, some of them were good, but the ones that we trained through, you know, they were all English, sort of local lads and girls, and they weren't interested in staying for the longer term.
Hugh Merriman. Now, the government tightened up immigration rules back in 2011, and the whole idea was to benefit places like Bexhill, where many people are on the minimum wage. So, as the Home Office argues, isn't it better to train up homegrown talent to be able to fill this skills shortage rather than bring in people from other countries?
Well, I think the government's succeeded well, and that's the difficulty we have, because we only have around about 600 job seekers for the whole of my constituency. And as a result, restaurants such as the ones that you've shown there just don't have the pool of talent locally to try and attract. They've tried, and it hasn't worked. So the argument I would say is, rather than lose good businesses, and these businesses pump in £1.5 billion worth of tax into the exchequer each year. We need to help them succeed and really thrive.
Okay,
and that's why we need to look further afield.
Immigration is a very hot topic at the moment, especially in the context of the referendum. Are you arguing then that the case for small businesses outweighs the government's desire to keep immigration levels down?
Well, where I get frustrated by the European Union rules, without wishing to take Chris's tie from him, is that we cannot pick and choose those sectors where we have a real need. Within the European Union, anybody that wants to work can come over here and work. What we need to be able to look at is where we actually need to attract the skills, and this is one area where we do, in order to help these incredibly successful businessmen continue to succeed and keep paying into the exchequer.
I know you're not going to tell us. You sound like a man who's preparing to vote leave, because it's the EU rules, the fact that you have to let EU migrants come and work here over people from other countries.
That's going to be one of the arguments that people have to actually take into account. But actually another argument that you can use is that a reformed EU that the Prime Minister is going to deliver will see migrant benefits cut. So you should see less people coming from the EU and perhaps more people coming from other parts of the world that we need. So there's a bit of balance.
Now you're speaking as an it. Lovely. You've kept us guessing, Hugh. Thank you very much. Now, Chris Wells, I know you'd love to talk about the problems of being part of the EU and the fact that the levels of migration that come from Europe, but actually, what would you rather have? Would you like to bring in people from countries like Bangladesh to work in the curry houses of Margate, or would you rather have more homegrown talent trained up in order to do the job?
Well, you can do both. I mean, the issue here is really very simple and straightforward, is that bringing in immigrants from the new Commonwealth or countries in that sort of area is the only bit of immigration the government can actually control. And as a result, the pressure is on that across the board. And it could be family members, it could be people who want to get married, it could be curry chefs, it could be any number of other people. But, the pressure is on that particular group because it's a tiny part of the whole immigration process. If we leave the EU and we actually get to reassert our particular ability as a nation to decide who we want, if we want just a year importing curry chefs, we can do it.
So with your points-based system, that would work. Is this a problem in Thanet? Because that's also quite a long way from London. I mean, it's something that's obviously big on other coastal communities here.
I'm not aware that it's a specific problem in that context. I mean, I've come across it before in terms of East London, the Bangladesh community, a number of years ago, in doing some work I did there. But it is certainly becoming true. I think all MPs outside London are finding that their surgeries are getting clogged with people who are trying to get others in from other than the EU and finding it really difficult.
OK, now it's time for some of the other news you may have missed this week in 60 seconds with Cecily Snowball.
Brighton and Hove City Council have expressed their anger over press reports that 28 young people in the city were planning to commit acts of terrorism. The council, along with Brighton and Hove Muslim Forum and Sussex Police, say the claims are not true.
It's giving the impression there's a real issue in the city with jihadists, with jihadi brides, with cells, with gangs, and that's absolutely not the case.
Plans to build a 320 metres tall communications mast near Sandwich in Kent have fired up campaigners who say it could upset the rural landscape.
It is at the height of the Shard in London, and we get gale force winds. It's an open area there, and this could mean that it could be dangerous if it fell, and nobody seems to be able to take responsibility for its safety.
And drivers rejoice. Councils in the South East will receive more than £8 million of government funding to fix around 150,000 potholes. The region is receiving one of the largest lump sums, but critics warn it won't be enough to bring the roads up to scratch.
Do you get a lot of complaints about potholes, Hugh Merriman?
Yes, and actually I give quite a lot out as well. I lost my tyre a week ago to a pothole, so I welcome all of that investment that's coming through.
Okay, thank you very much. That's just about all we've got time for from the South East this week. My thanks to both our guests today, Hugh Merriman, the Conservative MP for Bexhill and Battle, and Chris Wells, the UKIP leader of Thanet District Council. We're going to be back next week, or rather Julia will, with all the political news and chat in the South East.
How long will the row over David Cameron's tax affairs continue? Will voters appreciate the government's £9 million pro-EU leaflet dropping on their doormat, paid for